We are live, and your voice is part of the conversation from the very first minute. I'm Jeremy Horn, also known as the Product Guy, and this is TPG Live, where product thinkers at every level come together. Whether you're leading a team or just getting started, this is your space. From interns to CEOs, startups to global giants, every voice matters here. This isn't just a live stream, it's a real-time conversation. Jump into the chat right now. I'm watching it live, and your questions and insights will shape where we go. If someone on your team should be here, send them the link right now. There's still time to jump in. We're just getting started, but first, allow me to introduce you to the roundtable. First up is Jay Chen. Jay is a seasoned product leader with experience at Dropbox, Amazon, Apple, and early-stage startups. She's currently building AI agents at Firsthand, where she leads product efforts in ML and large language model powered search, recommendations, and workflows. At Prime Video, she helped ship content experiences from 0 to 1 to scale. Jay holds an MBA from Wharton and an MS in computer science from UPenn, and outside of work, she supports and invests in early-stage startups. We're also joined by Garrett Lang. With over 25 years of product experience, Garrett has led initiatives at Google, Nielsen, GE, PwC, and more. He's a serial entrepreneur and the founder of PlateRate and My Profitability Mavens, innovating across food tech, ed tech, and AI. Garrett helped market share climb into Forrester's upper right quadrant and received the most visionary product award of the year from the product group. There's also Niranjan Rode. Niranjan is a fintech product leader known for building and securing platforms at scale. He's launched capital-as-a-service products, modernized core payment infrastructure, and developed ML-based risk models to strengthen fraud detection. He also serves on Canada's National Payments Advisory Council and gives back as a pro bono AI product consultant and mentor for leading accelerators like Mars and TBDC. And finally, we have John Halberstadt. John is the founder and principal consultant at HA&L with 2 decades of executive leadership experience across finance, healthcare, retail, and AI. He helps organizations evolve how they manage product and portfolio work with a focus on agility, alignment, and modern ways of working. John is also committed community builder, regularly speaking on agile AI and product leadership, mentoring startups, and serving as VP of professional development for PMI Northern Nevada. Today on TPG Live, how do you manage the voices that shape your product but never speak up? And what does it take to lead when you don't control the resources or even the room? Join us in the chat room and at the roundtable as we discuss all this and much more coming up next on TPG Live. Before we get started, a quick reminder. What you see here on YouTube is only part of the Product Way. Our Patreon is where serious product professionals go to make better decisions, grow faster, and open new career opportunities. Members get the full experience, proven frameworks and tools you can use right away, expanded TPG Live recaps with actionable strategies that go beyond the roundtable, curated introductions to trusted hiring managers through PM Select, and our exclusive Roadmap to Mastery series, including How to Lead at the Intersection of Product and AI. Members are already landing new roles and solving tough product challenges more effectively. Join them today at patreon.com/theproductway or use the QR code on your screen to become a member right now. Your go-to platform for all things product management, connecting you with industry leaders, trendsetters, and a global community of insights and unique perspectives. This is the Product Way.
Hello, everybody. Hello and welcome. So everyone joining us here, once again, thank you for joining us. You're what we consider to be part of our off-screen roundtable. We've got a really great roundtable for you here today. And before we just jump into anything, I did a whole bunch of introductions. Jay, Niranjan, John, Garrett, anything that to correct or add?
I think you nailed it. Thank you.
All right. Outstanding. So as everyone knows, I like to start with a simple question to kind of get everyone loosened up and to get the show going at the beginning. So we're going to start with, for our today's question of the show is, what's a product metaphor you actually like? So I'm going to just go in the order from the top of my screen on down. So that means Niranjan, you're up first.
Great. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here. And thanks, Jeremy. So, one metaphor I try to think of is I think of product managers as central banker coming from a fintech world. It had to be that, right? Because I feel like product managers or even senior product leaders for that matter, we are not just managing backlog, we are managing stability, we are managing security, and even monetary aspects of that complex economic system. I mean, in day-to-day life, we have to balance growth, which is like printing new features, versus inflation, which is like our tech debt, and the operational risk that comes with it. So the primary mandate for any product leader here is like to maintain the market's trust. That's a very difficult part. But because in our world, a loss of trust on the product directly impacts revenue churn and the cyclical effect it has. So yeah, I like to think, or my metaphor is comparing a product person to a central banker.
All right. Sounds good. Garrett, what do you got?
I kind of think of it like a vehicle. I guess I'm in food tech, so we deliver food. That's one of the things we do. And, really people don't know exactly how the vehicle works, but they know it's very useful. It gets them from place A to place B, and it's very effective at what it does. They can perform lots of functions. You have all kinds of vehicles out there, from backlifters to cars and sports cars to minivans. And there are lots of different price points, different quality levels. Price doesn't always mean quality, but sometimes it does. All these things are true with software as well. I also think that you use a lot of experts to create a car and make it simple for the end user, which is what we try to do with software if we do it well. There's a lot under the hood, but it makes it really easy for an end user to get their job done and really empower them.
All right. John?
I really like that. I'm still processing Garrett's, but that was fun.
Oh, did I go too fast? We can all just let it soak in a little.
No, it worked just fine. I went through a bunch of these. I spent more time on this question probably than intended, and probably spending more time on this answer than intended. But of the ones that I was sort of ideating through, I like the idea of a toolbox, because the toolbox is a useful metaphor, I think, of most good products. Is they're not monolithic. They solve a set of problems often for a particular user, and in some cases a diverse set of problems. But there's some other metaphors within the toolbox that I kind of like, which was along the lines, I think, of some of the things that Garrett was talking about, or at least sort of similar conceptually, the quality of the tools. So there's a dollar store screwdriver and there is a $10 Craftsman, and both of them are screwdrivers. But the quality of that makes a big difference. The longevity of that makes a big difference. How they all work together makes a difference. And then also the usefulness and the usability of any good product. So I think about that as well as, is it easy to understand? Is it easy to actually get that utility value? And is there utility value there? So those three key elements of any item in a toolbox, I think, really help with that. And especially also these days with APIs and what everyone is doing in terms of evolving their products, it's a living, breathing organism for a lot of products. They're not the things that we used to ship on CDs or, God forbid, discs many, many, many years ago. So that's kind of my modern perspective on modern product metaphors.
That's great. At least you didn't go back to tapes.
Hey, I may have one in the basement. I will go take a look, but after the intermission.
Jay?
And so many great answers. I think for me personally, a product metaphor I really resonate with is the ship captain, because kind of similar to a ship captain who steers the ship through changing sea. A PM's day-to-day usually involves kind of steering the product through changing conditions toward shared destination. It can be the business landscape that's changing, technology, especially through AI nowadays, and also, of course, like the people you work with. So that one really definitely.
Gotcha. It's something, you had a weird hiccup on your audio right at the end there. I'm not sure if there's something might have gotten bumped, but I think we got the whole piece there anyway. But that's a good one as well. Ship captain, I think, was one of the ones I was considering. I was considering it as I pondered this, and I want there's so many product metaphors to choose from, and I was just like, do I want to talk about a product or product manager, so I really went with, I think the one that, something that for those who've heard me speak, one of the ones that I often talk about is a product. A product is a relationship. You don't get it all at once. No. You build it slowly with trust, attention, following through. A good onboarding, it's not love it at first sight. It's a promise to keep showing up. When your product misses a beat, it lags, breaks, ignores feedback, that's when the relationship starts to decline. People don't leave because of one bad moment. They leave when you stop feeling heard, when it feels like the product stopped caring. Think of it like this. You care about retention? Don't ask, how do we keep users around? It's better off to ask, how can we be worth something, to commit to? So I'd say I go with, that's the difference between just shipping features and building something people would actually fight to keep. A relationship, a product. So that's kind of, that's my take. That's kind of how that's a metaphor that I like to often have a little bit of fun with there. And I think that resonates well. And I like that it humanizes humanizes everything, the product, and all the other interactions around it. So that's really going to bring us to our first topic, not continuing with the relationship theme, or maybe continuing with the relationship theme. And our first topic is around silent stakeholders. When you're dealing with your product, you're dealing with a lot of invisible forces that are shaping it. Not all influence is visible, from compliance constraints to procurement cycles to legal reviews. Silent stakeholders can shape the product outcomes in very powerful ways, sometimes invisible ways. And so I thought it'd be fun to kind of talk today about how product leaders can make the invisible visible, maybe manageable along the way. And so with that said, I'm just going to get the conversation kicked off because, some of the most powerful voices in product decisions never really appear, like in Jira or Figma. So which silent stakeholders have had the biggest impact on your product? Legal, finance, compliance, someone else? And for that one, I'm going to start with John.
Yeah, so thank you. I love the question. I was thinking as you were asking, and when I was reviewing it in the original, the document, to say, well, some of them aren't silent around me in one-on-ones after, and I imagine that's true for a lot of us. But for the teams that are doing the work, a lot of my history has been in financial services and insurance. So you mentioned compliance, and that definitely is one. And what I've found is both directly and indirectly, compliance is an unspoken or really spoken in other areas, right? It's, this product now can't launch. They're not silent to everyone, I found, is they ultimately are silent. They're silent in the forums where we need them to speak up. But that often that's triangulated. And so we hear later, we need to go back and do X, Y, and Z. So I've seen a lot of that in what I will really compliance areas, so governance, but whether healthcare and HIPAA, financial services, and you've got Sarbanes-Oxley and those other sorts of things. What I found is that those voices speak directly, and see if this resonates, and then I'd love to hear from others as well. They also speak indirectly. So I found that those voices sometimes are not speaking, hey, we have to do this to release this product or this feature or this enhancement. But other people on the team, often analysts or others involved, are saying indirectly, we can't do that because of this mystery ghost of compliance or similar governance bodies. And so what I've tried to do is to bring that out into the open in a respectful way, but to say, let's invite them to the conversation. Or normally I'd say is, can you show me the language that says that we can't do this, that there's a compliance issue, that what is the regulation? What is the auditing requirement? Because it either shuts it down, or if it's true, then we can bring those folks or their advocates, their proxies, whomever, into the conversation. So that's where I've seen it in those industries to be the largest outside of the executive team, which may be its own other meeting. But back to you, and thank you for the opportunity to answer that. I'd love to hear what others say.
Yeah, Jay, like who are those silent stakeholders that product teams often overlook?
Yeah, I think first of all, the premise of silent stakeholders means you don't really necessarily go out and seek for their perspectives, which I don't necessarily think that's quote unquote the right way to do it. Because I think for a PM, your responsibility is to think about the nature of the product. Say if it's compliance related, if it's highly regulated industry, then more often than not, the first step is to make sure that there's no blocker in a sense where for the product you're trying to build, nothing is going to block that. And similarly, if you're building an AI product, then of course you wanted to understand not just a compliance perspective, privacy perspective, but also maybe on the cost perspective. And that's kind of related to the head of finance, CFO as well, kind of thinking about when you make those AI API calls, what's the generation cost and how does that actually ladder up to the overall R&D forecasting for the entire company.
Excellent. Garrett, unacknowledged influence can really quietly derail someone's plans. Can you perhaps share maybe a time when a silent stakeholder significantly impacted your product direction? Negatively, positively?
I guess just in general, like I grew up in GE, and we always did stakeholder analysis, so we had to look at all the stakeholders up front and document every function that was a stakeholder in the project as part of our whole overall like corporate governance. But I would say the people that would either make or break the project that were the silent stakeholders weren't functions that were left out. It was the people on the ground. It was the day-to-day individual contributors who weren't high enough up to get into that meeting maybe, but it still mattered to them whether or not the system was easy to use. And I think the ones that I saw derail projects the most, and this is more from like having done audits of other projects, but if there wasn't a good user experience, the average day-to-day people on the ground didn't want to use the software. And I saw hundreds of millions of dollars of project budget get completely wasted because people didn't have a good transition from the as-is to the to-be process with a good user experience. So I'd say, ignore the daily foot soldier at your peril. You really have to make it user-friendly, intuitive, and beautiful. If it's not all three of those things, then, you could be DOA, dead on arrival.
And so that $100 million and wasted, I guess that was just one meeting.
I think it was $250 million over that project that I was thinking of was over $250 million. Although that one also had a mainframe Gestapo group that was protecting its job security. So, yeah.
Naranjan, same question to you. Time when a silent stakeholder significantly impacted your product's direction. And also to the audience, if you have questions, if you have comments, you have more insights, drop them in the chat room and we'll get them worked into the conversation. Naranjan?
Sure, yeah. It's been more than a few times already over this experience. But I agree with the different answers we heard, and just kind of building on what John said, because again, coming from fintech industry, I think the regulatory bodies and overall monetary policies and everything else are always the silent stakeholders, especially any compliance update coming from a regulatory body can be like, the rod in your wheel and completely derail your roadmap. Another one that it's a bit more philosophical, but another one that I think is the trust, like the market's trust in your product, not just your users' trust, but the overall industry and market trust. Like how do they perceive your product? Because in the fintech industry, if you lose that trust even once, like it can be as simple as a data breach, but it kind of has a big value on your brand and your product. So example comes to mind is when I was working with my body, uh, I was kind of getting ready to launch in Singapore, and suddenly their onboarding requirements for like let's say processing your payments through certain platforms changed, which means my vendor's API has also changed, which again becomes another technical silent stakeholder API contracts that you have with your integrating partners. So all these, anything changes, you have to change your approach. And long story short, our launch was delayed by 2 weeks, but it was worth it because at the end of the day, we were compliant with all the requirements.
So I guess as a follow-up to that is, I think it's often easy to assume that there's alignment when no one's pushing back, and so that's how you end up with a lot of these last-minute issues that end up coming up. What advice do you have? Like, what are some of the signs that people should be looking for? Because silence doesn't mean everyone supports it, as you've just demonstrated. What are some of the signs that an invisible stakeholder? What are some of the signs that might exist that an invisible stakeholder might be influencing your product without saying so directly?
Two things again come to mind. So first, if it's an external invisible stakeholder, my immediate advice or personally what I follow is I try to be on top of latest happenings and news, because I know something somewhere within the industry is going to come in and hit us on our blind side. Another thing is if it's an internal party impacting us, usually in the meetings, if you observe like they're not active, or the feedback that you're expecting from someone, you're not getting those impacts and feedback, which means something somewhere is amiss. So I think it comes down a lot to reading the room and you being abreast with the latest things that's happening around your product within the industry, which goes beyond your user interviews and the basic research that you do.
Yeah, I saw a lot of head nodding from John. John, what are some other signs that people can be looking for?
Yeah, one of the things I love about sessions like this is I learn at least as much as I share, which is a wonderful opportunity. I'm just really happy to be in conversation with the other guests as well. What I've been saying now for about 15 years is I read far more books about psychology than about technology. And I really think for anybody in product or leadership, that's really essential. So what I, after learning the hard way a bunch of times, really, and Garrett said something earlier in his example that got me reminded of sort of, even before we start on a product, to understand, and this is part of the agenda as well that was out there as far as that influence is, whose worlds are we upending by what we're building, right? And understanding what positional power people have there. So whether it's the mainframe folks, or it is, folks who have the legacy application or whatever the case may be, and not necessarily to assume bad intent, but it's not always conscious. So the passive resistance is far more dangerous and hard to spot. And I think that was sort of, Jeremy, your question perhaps. So what I like to do as much as possible is try to examine those things in advance, sort of war game it, look at things like at the beginning of some new effort, to do some equivalent of a pre-mortem and really say what could go wrong, especially from an organizational perspective. Because from my experience, and I'm not sure if yours all have been different, where we've had issues have nothing really to do with foundational technology. It really is we're upending somebody else's fiefdom or worldview with that product or that improvement. And so sometimes that can't be changed, but at least it's better to stop that project before it starts. Where it can, though, is through, I think, attraction and really not carrots and sticks, but looking at binding it as good product folks all do. Like, we're all trying to get folks to think about the impact of a product. So being able to use that, this will allow these benefits to the organizational mission and try to get people to look at the broader impact of what we're building rather than what they lose for a short period of time in their area of positional power and ownership, if that makes sense. But that's kind of my approach, is to, after doing it poorly for a few decades, I think I'm doing a little better now. And it's really a lot of preemptive. What are the organizational change management things that we need to consider? OCM really, I think, is underappreciated with any large change. So that would just be something else I'd suggest in general for folks to really understand. That's the missing piece, that if you miss it, your product will fail.
Jay, I think John, I want wargaming, pre-mortems. I think those are really good tools. Jay, to you, how do you proactively identify and involve the silent stakeholders before they become blockers?
Yeah, I actually resonate. What John was saying really resonate with me, the part where you're thinking about the organizational goal, because once you understand and kind of are able to communicate and align your different stakeholders on that piece, then it's a lot about, okay, for our product feature, product roadmap, what is the actual value that we're going to create with this investment that we're going to put in? And then you would potentially tell the story about how our users are going to benefit from the features you're building, and kind of ladder that up and to connect that with the business goal. And that's the way to really kind of understand how to bring people together. And then you start to think about who is potentially not aligned on the same page. Then you need to reach out and make sure that they're not a silent stakeholder anymore.
Naranjan, same question to you.
Yeah, just summing it up, yeah, I agree. Like, it has a lot to do with your human relations and psychology and how you frame it and the language that you use. So usually my approach and what seemed to have worked for me is speaking the other person's language. So for example, if I'm talking to finance, I'll be talking about profit and loss. If I'm talking to marketing, I'll be talking about our reach and what's our insertion rate and all those things. If I'm talking to an engineering lead or an architect, I'll be talking about, hey, what's our API contract? What's our performance SLAs? What's our commitment on all those things? So I think just first making them heard and then responding to them in their language, for me, it has worked a lot, because sometimes user impacts get underappreciated in this conversation, especially when we talk about the silent stakeholders. If we are, let's say, talking to UI or someone else, probably they appreciate the user impact stories or data around it more, because a finance guy would say like, hey, just tell me how much it's going to cost me and how much are you going to bring in, right? Like, that's their profit and loss view of the world. But yeah, that's my approach, and that's how I try to manage them, which has been helpful till now. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I know a lot of the time people get really nervous about silent stakeholders, and I think some folks might even lean away from some of the advice or tools because they're nervous about just things slowing down. And so, Garrett, to you, like, engagement doesn't mean slowing down, but it does mean being smart about how you involve people. What's your approach to balancing stakeholder input with product momentum?
So for me, it was about making sure that people felt very heard. And if I made sure that I had representatives from every function that was relevant to a project, what I would do is I would meet with them all in succession. And I would we weren't slowing down, we were moving very quickly. It would be one day, every day I was meeting with 1-2 different stakeholders. But what I would do is write down every single request that they had, every requirement that they had, I would write it down. And then in that template, I would say, this is how we're going to meet your needs. And there would always be some vision brought back to them that said, this is how we're going to accomplish the goal that you had. And I made sure that this was back in the, when I was doing these things back when, I had learned about CMM. And so I would do business requirements, not technical requirements. They weren't allowed to give technical requirements, but what were their needs, and documenting those needs in a thoughtful way. And then making sure that I've articulated for them a solution so they felt like their needs were heard. And that way it kind of opens the door that they can bring me their challenges and their goals, and that I'll actually listen to them and make sure that they're taken into account in the project.
Gotcha. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, again, just building a bit on that, I would say as a product leader, I think it's the basic step that usually helps out is being able to bifurcate between signal and noise, right? Because now you're interacting with so many stakeholders, everyone's going to have a different view of the world. And again, the common point on how you do that is basically what aligns with your organizational strategy, what aligns with your product goals or high level metrics that you have already defined as a success of this initiative or whatever feature you're trying to build, and the data that it aligns with. So every time I hear feedback or someone wants to do something amazing, like for example, when I was launching a new product at MindBody, everyone, especially my marketing and sales head, both the team members, they wanted to like go crazy and market it very, very widely. But that meant opening up that product to a lot of risk, like huge risk. So then the negotiation was more about, okay, do we do a beta small cohort launch and, like do a, like not market it crazy like within the market, right? Because we wanted to first build confidence and trust on the product before we used it as a marketing tool or a marketing strategy. So that's what I would say is an example of signal versus noise. Like, what are we trying to achieve with our product, how it aligns with our business and organization strategy, what is the data supporting it. Everything else, yes, you need to make them feel heard. Does it go into the backlog? I don't know. Does it validate the negotiation? I don't know. But that's a product leader's job to be able to separate the signal versus the noise.
Yeah, Jay, what are your tricks? What are your tips for helping these stakeholders feel heard?
I think it's often too late when you need them and then you start talking to them. What you usually want to do is, especially if you're in a new role, and that's also true after you've been in the role for a while, is to make sure that you have an open channel for different parts of the stakeholders. If you have internal users of your product, you want to make sure that there's a way to kind of help them share their needs, share their pain points, and kind of what they need. What kind of features they need and how they need the product to evolve. That's one thing. And another thing is more so make sure that you think about the different stakeholders that may be silent, maybe not, but kind of have that constant conversation with them to make sure that even though there's not potentially a ongoing project, but at least you understand how they're optimizing for their goals, what do they care about, and how do they think. And that kind of goes back to what we were discussing earlier about speaking their language. It's so key to have that conversation very constantly so that you know how to learn how they think and how they speak about what they actually care about.
Yeah, to that point about, so what advice, Jay, do you have? Because all the different departments, different backgrounds, different perspectives, everyone's kind of has a different language. What advice do you have for product people who are trying to figure out how best to communicate, whether it's legal, finance, marketing, etc.?
Yeah, I think two things. One is learn their language, but sometimes it doesn't even necessarily have to use their, say, sure, you need to understand finance, P&L in order to talk to your head of finance, but at the same time, maybe take a step back to just think very fundamentally, how can you communicate what you're trying to do? Use simple language. It doesn't have to be super complicated or super in their realm, if that makes sense. Because I have observed folks are overdoing it sometimes, going into the room and starting to speak finance language, and then it doesn't really turn out necessarily well because it can come off the wrong way to be like, oh, I am actually a finance expert, and the other person is like, no, I'm actually the expert here. So I think that's a subtle balance that I would like to strike.
Yeah, heck, don't even use product management stuff either. Don't say MVP. Don't say all those other horrible terms.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's not a phrase that you would hear family and friends use, you may want to be careful about using it. I hope you don't mind it. Just sort of add suggestion to add on. What I've found is some of us who've been around for perhaps too long have been in some of these roles in these different areas of the org, or have worked with people long enough that we can speak their language. One of the things I thought was really cool in this conversation so far is between what Jay, Naranjan and Garrett said separately, I think you have the trifecta, which is make the silent folks not silent anymore by getting to know who they are. And I may be putting words in Garrett's mouth, but also not just speaking their language to emulate it like a poor version of Google Translate, but part of that, I think implicit, and please jump in if I got this wrong, but I hope I didn't, because then my point will be broken, is the benefit of speaking their language is for empathy and shared understanding. And they know that I'm listening to them, but getting to know, and I think, Garrett, this was perhaps in some of what you were saying, but what do they care about? So like when Naranjan was talking about profit and loss, when I talk to the president, when I report to the president of the company, I'm going to share different things, in some cases than the COO, and certainly with someone who's in charge of the division that is going to be impacted by this. But the one thing that I would suggest, if folks in the real world don't have access to all of these things or don't know where to start, that there's a downside to this. But this is an area I just finished developing some training for using generative AI for product managers. And that is a wonderful use case if you're not familiar with those domains, to put that scenario out there, because it will help redirect things. If you haven't managed a P&L, you may not even know what those letters mean in this context. If you don't understand the impacts of your product and the ramifications and what they're going to want to know, these tools can really help get an intro education. You're not going to speak their language. You can't go toe to toe. As Jay said, you can't just walk into a room and pretend you're the next CFO. But you can use the language, but the language. You could, but you shouldn't, because you'll get caught. The second question, the first one's easy. But that's been my experience, is if you don't have that background, don't fake it, but use it as a way to get educated both on some of the language to expect to use, P&L being one, but speak in the language of things like outcomes. Understand what they care about. But if you're not there yet, if you don't know how to use OKRs, if you don't know why that construct matters, don't fake it. Don't just throw the word out there, but use these tools to help understand when you're having the conversations, how to frame them to communicate what matters. I think, Naranjan, to your point, right? What matters to them? Not talking about the API, but we're going to use an API for this so that it's easier and quicker for us to implement with more quality and it can scale. It's the why of it rather than, same thing with the financial aspects, those sorts of things. It helps orient it, not pandering to the audience, but helping them understand why it benefits in their domain of expertise. So that's what I would suggest.
Garrett, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was actually going to say, similar to John, that you should use generative AI, right? Like, because now, that's a tool that I didn't have early on in my career, right? It's still very new in the industry, but you can, if you're going to talk to a CFO, get knowledgeable about what the CFO's goals are, what are their challenges, and you can, even if you're a public company, research, and even sometimes if you're not, research your company's problems and challenges and come into that, knowing what's going on. I used to say, when I taught a product management boot camp, don't fake it till you make it, learn it till you earn it. And that's what we tried to do in the boot camp, is teach people enough to know how to do it instead of to feel like you have to fake it till you make it. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of people I know that were highly successful that did play the fake it till you make it game. I just was never comfortable with it. So, but I like to say, don't stress, just do your best and accept the rest. So once you've done your best, you can't do better, and you should always give your best anyway whenever something's important.
I love all the rhyming.
Sorry, I like to rhyme.
So it is easy to frame like legal or compliance or finance as blockers, but Naranjan, but if you involve them in the right way, they should be they should and can be very strong allies. What have you done to turn the more difficult stakeholder relationships into productive ones?
Different situation, different solutions, but usually the framework that I've tried to use, or what I've had most success with, is first early engagement. Like even with finance and legal, usually we try and bring them just for the specific part that they want to be involved in. But I've tried to keep them on meetings where sometimes like optional they join and they have found a lot of value through it, because then after that getting their buy-in becomes much more easy, because now they also understand a lot of things that get discussed in the background, which is not always possible. Second thing is I always try to find a partner. Like my first buy-in has to be either my engineering lead, my counterpart, or maybe a project manager or a program manager or even a director of finance. As long as I get my first buy-in, that's like for a product, for an actual product, you would call that as a land and expand strategy. That's what I've modified a bit to get these buy-ins from internal stakeholders, because everyone knows everyone, or someone knows someone within the organization, right? And that brings into play different relationship dynamics as well as organizational dynamics within that organization. So that's how usually I try to tackle it, and it has helped.
So as we start to wrap up the topic of silent stakeholders, I wanted to kind of pose one question and then kind of go around the room. And so I'll start with you, Jay, in that what advice would you give to PMs who are struggling to manage invisible or indirect influence on their products?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think it's hard to sometimes really understand or identify who the silent stakeholders are. I would say generally go back to the basic, think about what are the key success elements to your business, to your product, and working from there, working backwards to think, okay, then who might actually be involved or care about some of the decisions you make. And that would more often than not help you to understand who are the stakeholders that need to pull in, and then to have those, as Niranjo was saying, early engagement conversations, and to bring them along the way with you as you develop your product.
Excellent. Let's go to John, your advice. You're muted.
I put myself on mute. I'm kind of curious about maybe going last, if I may.
Sure. All right, Garrett, you're up.
All right, so Jay kind of made me do a blast from the past. I was remembering one of the things that we would do is go to the functional leaders and then ask them who are their go-to people on the ground, so that you actually do get the opinions of people on the ground. But like, there's always those individual contributors that everyone else looks to as a leader, even though they don't want to be a manager. Those are the people you want to be involved, because they're the ones that other people will take the lead from. So that's the way to get the individual contributor voice without having to go to every single individual contributor in a 75-person org or a 300-person org.
Niranjan.
Yeah, I have something called as the bread and butter approach, right? So everyone in a company is there to do a job, right? And so do you. Like, irrespective of you're a junior product manager or a product leader or whatever, you have your mandate, you have your job. That's your bread and butter, and that is why you are there. So as long as you do that part very, very strongly, right? For example, everyone says product manager is the voice of a customer. It's okay if you're new in that organization, you still don't know who your silent stakeholders are, you don't know whom to approach. Your every meeting should be about that voice of the customer, because that is slowly going to start building your confidence in yourself and everyone else's confidence in yourself. So it will not be like, hey, this guy is trying to fake something, or he doesn't know what he's talking about and all, right? As long as you're strong on your part, your credibility is increasing. And let's say 6-7 months down the line, you have something called as a bit of brand, personal brand that you've created in that organization. And that's going to be your currency. That's going to be your leverage. Now, when you talk about something else, you're not going to get dismissed, right? So it goes this way. You establish your bread and butter, your credibility, and now you're giving an open option for everyone to come in and have that, have that conversation where they know that whatever they say is not only being heard, but it is also understood and being internalized, because they trust you to do that. And I think that has opened a lot of gates for me, especially when starting a new job or moving into a new role, or even when I was in more junior roles. This always helped.
John, let's go.
I was going to say, I think
you.
that's sage advice. I like waiting to last for, also because I just talk so much that if I don't, sometimes meetings just end with me as the only speaker. So, but I actually, Narajan was a real, said something that to me was a really big jumping off point. And I actually heard this advice via a TED Talk podcast like over a decade ago from a former hostage negotiator, but just hang with me for a minute. But it was basically whatever people are concerned about is not what they're really concerned about. So, you know, the idea of the silent stakeholder and where that is really what, to the extent that we can understand, when you were talking about everyone is here for a job, what Narajan was saying, everyone's here for a job. Part of that is that I think most people care about the work that they do, the quality, the impact. So when people are silent, and we're implying that they're silent, and it's a problem, right? We're not implying that they're silent champions of us. They're silent, and they're going to stop us right before we ship product. The advice in this podcast that I had heard that really obviously stuck with me was get behind what they're saying and understand what's driving that. So if someone's in compliance, I'm not going to say that's not an issue. I'm going to really try to understand, oh, your job is on the line because you are the guardian at the gate, right? So your job isn't to get good product out there. You would be happy if we were running Windows 95 because it's security flaws, right? But that's sort of the thing is with true compassion, not in a manipulative way. But we should always, as product people, want to understand, like we do for our users, the same level of rigor in understanding our stakeholders that we do with our users of what's driving them, what are they worried about, what's the empathy map look like for all of these folks, and then how can we mitigate that, or at least if we're not going to be honest about, you know, what those impacts will be, so we can plan for them. So, but I really think it comes back to truly that idea of understanding and then getting to the heart of at each individual level what those concerns are, and then being able to make the unspoken spoken and be able to address it, like as Naranjan I think had pointed out. So thanks for the opportunity to go last. This was I like binding those things together, so thank you.
We do have one question just came in from the audience, from Julie over on YouTube. She says that not all silent stakeholders are equally important to bring on board. How do you map and pinpoint the critical folks? Sometimes you just can't make everyone happy and engaged. Who wants to tackle that? Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, so I would think very simply two things: who might block you and who can actually be an advocate for you. So who might block you, probably more obvious, compliance, legal counsel, things like that. Who potentially can be an advocate for you is also interesting to think through. Say if you're launching a product or a feature that's going to improve potential like processes, then the operations leader might be a good advocate for you. Similarly, if you are working on a feature that's going to solve like a huge client who's like an enterprise client and who's going to bring a lot of revenue, then aligning with the revenue leader might help you actually push your project forward.
Excellent. Anyone else wanted to add to that? Going once, going twice.
I was just going to say really quickly, and this probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. I don't think it's realistic with any material product for any, at least medium or larger organization, to make everyone happy. What I think is important for leadership, I see that smile on Jeremy's face, though. You may have some additional thoughts there as well, but
I never believe in making anyone happy.
Well, if you have to choose from your stakeholders, the ones that cut the checks are often.
Details.
But joking aside, I think what's important, and I think what I believe it was Naranjan who had said this as well. Part of where I think as product folks will get a lot more credence, credibility, and less silence from those potential concerned stakeholders is how we respond when we're not going to make them happy. So to be able to have alignment over agreement is a really important principle. To be transparent about what we're doing, to not just say this product is going to make the world a better place, but I mean, if we're shipping social media, we should talk about how we're going to mitigate some of the concerns that we know that come with a particular tool in the studies that have been found, as just one example, right? So we can preempt that by understanding those needs and let them know what we are or aren't doing. So we're not making everyone happy, but at least we have that trust that Niranjan was talking about. When I tell you bad news, you can trust me also now because I'm saying things that are good. You know that I've told you the truth, so you know that I will always be telling the truth. That credibility, I think, is really important as product people, as leaders in general, but especially as product leaders.
And we just had one other question come on in. This is from Nara, also on YouTube. How do you manage stakeholders who appear to be supportive but use others to create blocks and challenges? The nefarious stakeholder. Niranjan, since you're laughing, I'm going to you.
Yeah, no, it's just like, real world questions and scenarios coming up, a lot of organizational dynamics, which suddenly is now becoming our biggest silent stakeholder, so to say. But yeah, interesting question. So I would again go back to the intrinsic motivation. And I think a lot of us here touched on that part is everyone is doing a job. And maybe if something gets released, their job is on the line and they're trying to protect. Now, some of them might not do it right in the front, but that's where, asking right questions plays a very vital role. So I think someone was talking earlier, like, don't fake it. Like, you can answer the first question correctly, but if it's not your original idea, it's not your original question, the second question is going to trip you. Now, it will come down to how do you do it, right? Like, are you really subtle or diplomatic around it? How assertive are you? And are you directly calling someone out in a group meeting? That's never going to end well. So how do you approach it? Do you have a meeting before a meeting or a meeting after a meeting, and then try to call out someone without calling them out? So I think that's the part where we call product management is an art and not a science. So I would tackle it that way. Yes, like making sure I'm getting to the right person by asking the right questions.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this one?
I'll jump in and say I don't think it's directly calling people out, but I do, like, when I try to understand people's needs from the beginning, I try to negotiate as far as what's a must-have need versus a nice-to-have need. And if someone says something that sounds like a nice-to-have, and I'm going to say, well, that sounds like something that you could live without if you had to. It might take an extra 30 seconds to do something you do twice a day, but could you live without that if it came down to it? And then I'm negotiating right away. If I think someone's being unreasonable, then I can have an offline conversation and escalate if I need to. But I try to make those negotiations and be very transparent and explicit up front. And if you build a good enough rapport with people, you hope that they're not going to go behind your back and try to tank the project unless there's some alternative, modus operandi that you don't know about, which can happen. But if those happened, I didn't know about them. So,
or they worked at one of my old companies. I'm not going to say which large company it was. We've got another question, also from Nara. How do you manage key stakeholders who appear to be? Wait. Oh, geez. Did I just close the wrong one? Hold on.
No, it came in there twice. It's the same
it
thing.
Came in there twice. I'm like, that really sounds familiar. All right.
Well, we could talk about it again. Let's see if the answers are the same. As long as I'm off mute, the one thing I would say, though, is also use data. So as product people, we should be using data to back up, to confirm or correct anything. When people come from other directions and say, we have to do X because of this, I can't tell you who said this. One is I like to bring that up, not to call anybody out, but to call not the person, but the statement out. We've heard that we can't ship X if we don't have Y. And then here's the data from our customers, and true back to any of the product data that we have, anything that's objective and concrete, rather than talking about opinions. I mean, what Garrett had said, and don't know what your experience has been, except we're product people, so I do, because it's been the same, right? This could be a support group. I think it's that same idea of, are we dealing with generalities, right? It won't work. Can we be more specific so we can have a real conversation? So even if they didn't raise that, I like to bring those things out into the open. I had a really good mentor who said, when there's an elephant in the room, introduce him. So introduce it. I've heard that we have this issue. I don't care about who said it, in front of everybody, so we can have a conversation with specificity and data where possible. Let's talk through it. And I could be wrong too. And I should always, as a product person, be open to changing my opinion based on new data, new perspectives as well, right? It's not just we're disproving somebody. We're collectively making that decision. So, Nara, I hope that at least sort of hits your question, if not indirectly. I don't think you can solve people doing that, but you can remove the incentive for people to work around it by not letting it be a secret anymore. You bring it out into the open and you talk about it concretely.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So that brings us. So we're wrapping up on our silent stakeholders, so they shall forever no longer be heard. And I like that joke. Just think about it for a moment. All right. Anyway, so we're going to move on to our trivia segment. Now, here's the thing, everyone. I mean, I'm not just talking to the people you can see on your screen right now. I'm talking to you in the chat room who know the answer to this trivia question. Don't say it. Don't type it. Don't put it in. We're going to do the trivia question. At the end of the show, we're going to go into the answers. We're gonna learn a little bit more background about it. But with that said, allow me to introduce you to our trivia question of today's show.
Which popular communication product was originally created as a tool to help build a video game? Once again, which popular communication product was originally created as a tool to help build a video game?
All right, so hopefully everyone heard that. So it's which popular communication product was originally created as a tool to help build a video game? Don't say the answer, please, if you happen to know it. And definitely stick around to the end of the show, and we'll get into it a little bit at that point. So now that everyone's teased a little bit, we'll get into our second topic. And our second topic is about the product manager as a negotiator, influencing without authority at every level. So product managers, as we all know, live in the space between teams, priorities, opinions. We don't own most of the resources. We're accountable for the outcomes. Every PM is at some level a negotiator. I think, as we've already very thoroughly explored also through the talk about silent stakeholders and what it takes to make that work. So I thought it'd be fun here to really explore how to do it well without burning bridges or losing momentum along the way. So negotiation, it isn't a rare event in product. It's really the daily part of the role. So how do you, Niranjan, how do you think about negotiation in the context of product management?
It's tricky. Depends on what you give and what you get, for sure. But I feel like negotiation changes very dramatically in nature and even in context, depending on the size of the project and the impact. So the bigger the budget, the more hard you're going to have to negotiate and protect your space. How I try to approach it, or what has usually worked, is again being very specific about what your alignment is. So when I say alignment, what's your alignment with overall company goal and your product objectives or OKRs, or what are your KPIs you're trying to hit, especially when it's an inter-business unit negotiation. Just having that common goal helps a lot, because you're no longer talking about, hey, I want this, versus someone else saying, no, I need this. Now you're evaluating everything over a common baseline, which is what is your ultimate goal and how or why you're trying to get there. So as long as you have that buy-in from basically everyone in the room or whoever you're negotiating with, that helps a lot. So long story short, try to remove the subjectivity from it, be as data heavy and as value driven as you can, and be specific to your point.
Jay, how do you think about negotiation in this context?
Yeah, I sometimes find it hard when you go into a conversation, you are planning to negotiate something, and then it turned out to be a completely different conversation. So I've realized that a way to kind of navigate that is going into more of a negotiation setting. In the beginning, or even before the negotiation meeting, I would actually talk about what are we going to talk about for this particular meeting. What is the agenda? What are the topics? What are the non-topics even? So then we are more so going in with the same mindset, and we are going to talk about what we are going to talk about and not spiral in 100 different ways.
Garrett, what are some of the most common negotiations PMs are involved in that you're familiar with, whether they call it negotiation or not?
I think for me, it's mostly scope, right? Because that is something we do have authority over, is whether or not something's in scope or not. Are we going to prioritize it in the backlog? Maybe the overall project scope isn't theoretically in your purview sometimes, but if you're owning a product, it really is. And I think you have to sometimes use that to say, look, this isn't something that we have the bandwidth for right now, or if it's not within the scope of a project, have to say, look, this isn't something that I think we're going to get senior management approval on. Can we put together a cost benefit analysis and go back to the CFO together to ask for another $500,000? And if we can do that, we'll expand the development team. We'll get what you want done. And so using scope as what it is, which are our main area of negotiation, because usually that's the biggest area. Although one of the things I talk about product management.
I think we have some
engineers. Oh, sorry, did we lose me?
So
all I was going to say is that Go ahead.
Yeah. No, do your final, what you were going to finally say.
I was just going to say the scope of a product manager can be so varied that it's hard to know exactly what you own and don't own until you get into the role for 6 months, and then you'll have a better idea of what chips you have and which ones you can play where.
John, over to you for the same question.
Yeah, scope is an interesting one. I think there's some levers that we can pull. Maybe Garrett, this may or may not be exactly what you meant by scope, but like one of the bigger products that I inherited at one point, and the product manager with it, when I first met them, I said, well, we've been working on this for 2 years. We really have to ship this. What's the number one feature? And they said, this one. And I said, okay, we're going to focus on an MVP and we're going to get that out and get some feedback. And they said, okay. And then they said, but I also need this one. And then I need this one. Yeah, I'm seeing some, again, it's a support group here, right? So when we say scope, really, what are the levers we can pull? And I think if we can pull in techniques like iterative development, which everyone should be doing, the idea, what I tried to do and where I think we can negotiate is, it's like a bus. Like if you don't catch this one, it's going to be on the next one. So let's get this out. Let's get some feedback. We have knowledge that we can use that will allay some of their concerns. And I think rather than the fact that we don't have positional power, I think we should use the superpowers we have of knowledge of, back to the earlier part of this, why are they worried? Well, they're worried because we're going to ship something that's going to cause some problems or impact stuff. So how can we mitigate some of those concerns and risks so that they want to be part of that? So that we've actually brought them over to the side of doing this. And I think smaller releases of clear value, and then Niranjan reinforced this as well, and using data. I've had many CEOs, and I'm sure you all have too, say, we have to do this. It's in scope. We have data, and we come back, and we've looked at the analytics like, I know you're the president. We can hire someone just to build this just for you, because the data says that nobody else has ever used that piece of the code. You know what I mean? So we should use what we know to make our influence greater with folks, because I think we leave some stuff on the table because we're not talking about some of the other economic and organizational imperatives. And if we did, I think we'd have a lot more ability to negotiate with compassion and empathy, really. I mean, I think that's a lot of both of these parts of the session for me. So, but I think we can do a lot.
So I got a follow up there.
Oh yeah.
Did you say you worked on a feature for 2 years?
No, I inherited a product. I got hired in a place, and then I got put in charge of product because there was a product that hadn't been released other than bug fixes and patches for 2 years. And they said, we need to deliver this. And I don't remember. It was something absurd. I don't know if it was a month or a couple of months. And I said, we'll do quarterly. This is a monolithic, not a SaaS app. Like this was a .NET thing. And there may be some people watching who know, yes, I'm talking to all of you. But yeah, but that was the problem. Well-intended, brilliant people, right? So this is not a good versus evil kind of thing. But it came down to this idea of the real problem was they didn't ship it because people who were at high levels at the executive team wanted a perfect product. And we all know that the world changes. And so there never was perfection. And that's why it wouldn't ship, is that the landscape, you all know this, so Garrett was saying, the scope, right? So make it small, right? You can change your mind. That's what I literally had a conversation. I'll go on mute, but that was my agreement with the CEO. I said, I'm going to do quarterly releases. Statistically, you won't change your mind at the beginning because I'll have enough time to adapt. And at the end, because it's almost done, the next bus is almost here. So maybe in the middle, and that got us delivering releases at a quarterly cadence within, I don't know, 3 months, a couple months of my being there. So, and I wasn't doing anything magical. Like I don't have any superpowers other than just trying to understand what was going on. So yeah, anyway, but that was a true story.
I got brought in on a project several years ago. I was an AI project. I saw Steve is saying, isn't this the point of Agile? So I got brought in on a project several years ago as an AI project, and I'm sitting in one of the first. I was joining in a bunch of meetings. I get into one of the meetings, and they're like, "And this is version 47 of the product," and I was like, "Cool. So, like, what are the results?" They were working on developing version 48 of the product, and in the year and a half that they've been developing it, and this was a startup, it had never been released. Great iterations there. So that was an interesting startup to say nonetheless. Jay, without formal authority, we often rely on persuasion, trade-offs, relationships. How do you build influence when you can't rely on that positional power?
Yeah, I think right off the bat is find out a way you can build trust. And I usually think of it pretty simply as kind of you go to, again, whoever your stakeholder is, you kind of want to align on how you wanted to solve a particular problem or how you want to proceed with your project. And then once you get the alignment, then you go do it as the way it was aligned. And then the third step is you communicate what you have done, and then you go back to that loop to align on the next step again. So kind of pretty simple, align, you do, and you communicate, and you kind of build that trust, and you can kind of have a better position long term that you can just influence them, be on the same page, like much, much easier.
Garrett, to you, same. As I decide to start sounding like Yoda for some reason.
Come back to me.
All right. Niranjan.
I like the idea of building iterative, and I think that's what it comes down to. But also, more importantly, having a very, tight business case. So I know it's a very debatable topic: is should we even be doing business case, or how fluid should our PRDs be? But I'll not jump into PRDs, but from my point of view, business case, because somehow I feel like at the end of the day, you need to have a baseline that you can always fall back on, because when negotiation starts, going southwest and people get too emotional about it to say, I want this versus we need this, or, like when we get into this must haves and good to have kind of conversation, you need something to fall back on. And I think that's your business case always.
But
Yeah.
how do you prepare? How do you prepare for those tough conversations where the priorities are not going to align easily?
It depends. So basically, I like to have as much intelligence beforehand as possible. So again, if I'm new in the situation or new in the role, my always fallback is what am I bringing to the table and how confident am I about it. So if my value in that conversation is bringing the why, which usually the product manager is responsible for, like why are we doing this? Why now? Why not later? And all those type of questions. I try to be very, very airtight on that. So as long as I can, even if I don't have a business case, as long as I can baseline it to this why conversation, I think usually it turns out to be good. And again, it all comes down to what is your tone and how you're approaching these conversations. Yeah, I would always fall back to my business case and why.
Garrett, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I agree with everything said. Agile have a good business case, but I also like to give a crystal clear vision of what I'm going to build in an agile sprint. I think a lot of people go into it with user stories, and there leaves a lot of ambiguity. And so what I taught in my product management bootcamp is what I call planned agile, where I would actually plan out the sprint in real detail, crystal clear detail, so everybody knew what they were going to get afterward. And by doing that, I got buy-in to what was going to be delivered, so that when it was delivered, it would ship and it would be what people wanted, and we were all on the same page. So that was, I think, a big key to success.
Gotcha. John, are there frameworks or mental models that you use when entering a negotiation as a product manager?
I don't know if I could call what I'm about to say a framework, but certainly the mental model I think would apply. So my background is kind of weird. It's been all over the place, and most of it's been in executive roles, leadership with a product focus for a while. And I only say that because I think one of the benefits of sort of falling into that opportunity as well is to go in with the idea from basically an entrepreneurial business, forgive me for saying this if this doesn't bounce well with everybody, capitalist type idea of I'm producing a product that's going to have, in most cases, some sort of economic benefit, even for internal products, greater efficiency, etc. Some of what Garrett was talking about, and hopefully I could use this as a jumping off point as well, like using economic frameworks and talking about things in the context of like using WSGIF. So we can have an objective way, like executives should, and I know it doesn't always happen that way. You can still have presidents of companies do things off of ego or opinion. But to really come in and talk about it as an effort, and again, Garrett, I like the idea of talking about this being planful, so you know what you're going to get still in an agile way. To use this model in these conversations, I'm a product guy, but I'm a product guy with an entrepreneurial mindset. I want to deliver things to my users so that their lives will be better in whatever way this product is supposed to solve those problems. And I need to be able to not only use that language like we talked about earlier, but the mental model is I want to deliver something as soon as possible that gives value to people in clear economic terms in most cases, right? And I think that's the mental model. As I walk into those discussions as an executive or as an entrepreneur trying to have an economic benefit from something that's valuable to my customers, rather than walking in as a product manager saying, I know product and let me show you all these cool mock-ups and, Figma you mentioned earlier as well. That's a great means to an end, but what is the bottom line and binding it to the organization's mission or whatever issues they have. That to me is the best way to have a good conversation, is to have it data-based, but also based on the data of how does it benefit the organization.
Yeah, if only I could have gotten in on that IPO. Sorry, wistful thinking.
Hey, just put an IPO out there right now. Anything that has Gen AI in it, you will be a quadrillionaire. I just saw something. Well, anyway, or crypto. There you go. But that's a different meeting.
Yeah, Gen AI and crypto, put them together. I have no idea what that is. It generates coins for you on the fly. There you go. So, Jay, how do you push back on ideas or requests while still maintaining the collaboration, respect?
I think when you say no to a stakeholder or a feature request, it's more important to say the why and how you reach that conclusion. And a lot of the times, it's not simply just a no. It's not like we can never do this, but more so we cannot do this now because of other priorities. And if you are able to clearly communicate that, and again connect to the business goals, then you'll be able to say, this is what I wanted to share with you as a stakeholder, and I can't promise you when we can do like the next XYZ things, but here they are in a priority list. And going back to having them heard, then we are able to communicate that I've heard you, this is on the roadmap. We cannot do this because of the current priorities.
Garrett, same.
So I try to quantify everything. I'm very quantitative, so that's my computer science background coming out.
Quantitative and poetic.
I know, right? So what I try to do is look at dollars saved, dollars earned, and number of person hours saved, and then I create a translation between all three of those so that I have like a dollar value, bottom line dollar value add. And by doing that, if someone comes to me and says, "Oh, this is going to save, this is super important for me," I'll say, "Okay, how often do we do that, and how much time does it save to do that?" And then it turns out, and I've had this conversation with people who were super passionate. This has to get done. It has to get done, and it would save like 2 hours a month. And I was like, "Well, I know this is important to you, but we're going to prioritize it with all these other things." And now you have to go to Sally and John and all these other people who have these, I'm going to save $200,000 or I'm going to make an extra $2 million in revenue, and try to tell them that your thing is more important, and then suddenly it doesn't become the most important thing anymore.
So I have a stylistic question for you, Niranjan, in that when you're negotiating with senior executives versus peers versus people on your team or other teams, yet you vary your communication style. Like, how do you adjust your negotiation style when working with executives versus peers versus cross-functional teams?
That's an interesting question. I think again, trying to match their language is how I try to do it. Like, I know who is going to understand what and in what way. So for example, if I'm going to a CEO or someone, I want to talk maybe numbers and impact, or even alignment with business strategy and those things, because they're going to appreciate the value of it. And if they're asking me to do something, and again, create trade-off options for them, because they are senior leaders, they need to make decisions and understand the impact at a 30,000 feet view, but also be comfortable with making those decisions. So it's my job to make them feel comfortable to get the decisions that I want to get right out of that negotiation, versus maybe a BA or a junior PM who is working on my team. Then I would approach that conversation with a lot more curiosity to say, okay, why? Go to the root of it and understand their motivation of pushing for something, about why they're pushing. Because at that level, I don't want to have conversations which are more directive and more data driven per se, to say, hey, no, this is what the data says, or this is what the impact is, and this is what we are doing. Because I want them to feel heard, I'll go in with a curious mindset. So I think that's too broad end of one spectrum, but that's how I will, tone my approach between these two, points, A and B. Like, depending on your level, I adjust my dial on how I approach it.
Yeah, John, how do you modulate your approach, whether you're dealing with executives, peers, cross-functional, maybe people more junior?
I feel like if any of my my fellow team members were here, they would jump in and say poorly, just for fun. I as I mentioned, my background has just been kind of varied. So I feel like I sort of have on the job training for being a bit of a chameleon and adapting to an environment. But I think others, and I can't quote anyone verbatim, this idea that these themes that keep coming up, I love what everyone here is saying, because it's really about the idea of truly listening actively to people and sort of understanding that. And so for me, and I'm not always, full candor, I'm not always great at moderating. I think good product people are passionate. I tend to be overly passionate sometimes, all the time. But understanding what other people care about and really understanding their perspective. And I think I'm just repeating some of the themes that have come up, and then using data to have a conversation. So moderating that, what Niranjan had said, I think actually is great, right? I might bring up data in a conversation like that to adapt my style, even when I'm talking with somebody on the team. But before I ever brought up data about why we wouldn't want to do that, I would listen to them first and understand where they're coming from. And so that really, in terms of tuning and moderating approach, starts with that. And then someone else had brought up, and it might have even been you, Jeremy, forgive me for not recalling, but this idea of curiosity. I mean, I think Niranjan, maybe you had just sort of said that. Anyway, I don't know. I think that's another word that I'm really happy
Well,
to
now I'm just curious.
There you go. So and I'm curious about your curiosity. So the circle is complete. But I think if we truly approach it with a truly open mind, where people are coming from, it's easy to adapt and have that sense of empathy. Truly, like, I don't understand their perspective, and the numbers don't make sense. But before I throw numbers in someone's face, they're emotionally attached to this. That's every product I've worked on. People have been emotionally attached one way or the other. I know, I see that look too, right? So I brought this up earlier in our meeting, but the Apple Newton, right? There were people passionate about that product in both ways. It didn't turn out well, but a future version did. But what we deal with is not neutral from a personality perspective, and we're good at this because we care. And I think that's part of what my self-reflection is. In certain meetings, I have to scale back my level of enthusiasm. And I also, and this is difficult for me, but I need to shut up and truly actively listen. I know, right? You're getting that vibe. But I think for all of us as product people, we're so excited. We're so excited about explaining why this cool thing that we're doing is going to be so cool. At least for me, I found I really need to self-reflect. I need to pause. I really need to actively listen. And then based on what I'm hearing and what I'm sensing, Niranjan had mentioned reading the room, then I can adapt effectively. If I don't do those things, I'm just playing dress up and I'm guessing what people want to see. That's fake, right? But I mean, the real adaptation is truly having all of the quantitative and qualitative data points to say, how do we have a good conversation knowing all of these disparate elements of data about this conversation? How do we do that gets everyone to a good outcome where nobody loses? So that's how I try to approach it. Still working on it, but some progress.
Awesome. So as we start to wrap up this topic, I wanted to just kind of go around the room, starting with you, Jay, in that what advice do you have for PMs in growing their negotiation skills over time, especially even early in their careers?
I really like Niranjan's mentioning of curiosity, and I don't think that's necessarily just for speaking with your engineering or IC folks here. It's actually across every different level. When you're speaking to the CEO, they are asking for, hey, can you actually do two things instead of one? You need to understand why are you asking for these two things? What are the priorities? What is driving this? And then you ask multiple levels of why, and then you get to kind of what they care about. And that's the same way for speaking with the engineers. They're telling you, oh, I cannot do this in 2 weeks. I need 4. You kind of break it down. What are the assumptions you're operating at? And potentially there's could be a misalignment there. Let's break it down. And you kind of find early signals of either misalignment or kind of different assumptions, or just maybe some frictions where it's in your continuous development pipeline where you can actually learn more about. So having that level of curiosity just adds so much benefit to understanding your stakeholders, but also generally beneficial for your product development as well.
Garrett, same question to you.
Yeah, I'm going to second curiosity because it breeds active listening and understanding, but I'll sort of add to that, always have a backup plan. I got taught how to negotiate by the guy that used to negotiate with Microsoft on behalf of GE. And he was like, you always need to have another choice. You always need to have another option. And so I think any kind of negotiation, you need to have a backup plan and not only have one choice.
Niranjan. And you can't say curiosity.
No, it's coming to a full circle. I think I started with curiosity, but yeah, I mean that's been my go-to always. But apart from that, I think what curiosity next leads to is empathy. Like curiosity is your first step. You go in with curiosity, you understand someone's point of view, and then you develop a natural empathy. Like for product managers, we have talked so much about having empathy, but I mean, nowadays it's a bit lost in practicality. We talk a lot about empathy towards our users and whatnot, but what about empathy towards your own team members and your internal cross-functional or all those people who help you develop your product. So that's how I think I would go start with curiosity, but also end up with empathy. Okay, right.
And John.
I keep wanting to quote Niranjan and say curiosity, but I think I've already done that a couple of times, so I won't do that. But I think that of the other things that have come up, so I really think there's ways quantitatively and qualitatively to do this. I think that the more that we can, I'm trying to remember how Google, when I first read, there was a really good quote from someone at Google talking about data-informed decisions for product. And I really think, at least for a lot of the instances where I've been working on product and helping get products out there for other people who've started them before I got involved, the missing link in terms of being able to have good conversations is that people often don't even know how to get at good data, what data to be looking at, and how to use data in a narrative, not manipulatively, but to tell a story. People in product, I think, are taught about stories. And we do care a lot about empathy mapping and things like that. But we also need to be able to, like when Garrett was talking about scope, I mean, when we cut scope or we need to look at what's going to be in a release, Jay had talked about this as well. I think we all look at this as what's an MVP, what's the next version, what are we deploying? I still find a lot of organizations, small and medium at a minimum, but even larger ones that I've worked with, still go off of gut, go off of highest title, loudest voice. I've been all of those, by the way, so I know the impact of those things. When I had silly titles, people they'd go implement a feature just because I thought and we need as good PMs to know how to mitigate that, know that that's going to happen. And I don't know how you do it without the ability to use data and know what data to use with the right audiences to have that armor, right? To have a good conversation. So I think the more that folks can spend some time on the quantitative side, and not just usability studies, right? But those sorts of things.
So what advice, so someone says, okay, I've got data. How do I connect this to a story? How do I turn this data into a story, into a narrative that'll that'll land? What?
Yeah. So for me, obviously, I like to talk. I think that's probably clear. A succinct and clear narrative that is representative. I think the storytelling problem is you can tell a story that is engaging and based on true data, but not representative. So what I like to do when I use data is to say, we could get X number of our current customers using this new product or this new capability. It's not 100%. Maybe like in insurance, there's in some cases, like we would build a product and deploy it where it would be state specific. But to still say, this allows us to get this amount of incremental revenue in. So you can have 100% of zero if you want to wait, or you could have 100% of this subset. You know what I'm saying? So that's how you weave the data in. So, and what are they interested in? If it's on the technology side, when we implement this, we will be able to mitigate these number of things. And as a product leader, I've had to how do you articulate solving tech debt? Well, as product people, we say, well, that's a technical issue. I've heard that. No, it's not. You go to business people and say, I now can give you greater quality and I can release things once this is done. I can release things on demand without having to pull these things back from production. I've got data behind that. So the data should reinforce the value in the eyes of those people whose minds you need to convince. And again, that's not monolithic, but that's how I would weave the data into a particular story. Is right now, the reality on the ground is that we have this situation. We implement this. This is what it looks like. We'll get some feedback. We can build upon that, etc. We will make decisions on the future versions of this application's delivery. And all of that is woven into that story. Current state, near-term, future state, and then that longer term. We've talked about what's on the right-hand side of the MVP. That can be a good, succinct, data-driven story that still has the points of the story, but it's believable and credible because you actually have objective quantification of it.
Yeah, offering 100% of zero sounds like part of the negotiation tactics I use with my 10-year-old son.
I do that one. I also say unapologetically, your customers don't care if you're 0% done or 99% done. Until it's 100%, they can use they can use a product that's 20% of the capabilities. But if you're working on a monolith, they can't use 99% done. They can't use it till it's in production. That is another way to say that succinctly. So yes.
Awesome. So that wraps us up for negotiating as a product manager. So that's going to bring us to our final segment, the trivia segment. So just as a quick reminder for the question.
Which popular communication product was originally created as a tool to help build a video game? Once again, which popular communication product was originally created as a tool to help build a video game?
All right, so let's go around the room here. Anyone? Jay, Naranjan, John, Garrett? Anyone have an answer?
I assume it's Discord.
I think Slack.
Oh, you said Discord.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What else? Any other guesses? Any other?
Slack.
Yeah, I think
You
Slack
said
and
Slack.
Discord, both have very similar stories. But
Slack and Discord.
John
Okay.
is the expert in the room on antic
Oh no!
product inceptions and antics things. But yeah, I think I
yeah.
would go with Slack.
Discord said Izit over on YouTube. John, did you have an answer?
Oh, I always have an answer. I don't know if it's the right one. I was thinking Slack like Jay, but now I'm thinking Discord.
Man,
I'm leaning on Discord at this point only because I normally hear that associated with people who are playing video games.
That's why I guessed it.
Oh, interesting. I was wondering stuff. All right.
As product people, that is basically our job, is to wonder stuff.
It's great
And
because
to build wonder stuff.
the
There you
people who
go.
play games pay for the whole thing. And the thing I love about Discord, I use it in my company, is that it's a free version of Slack that's more powerful. but it doesn't have as good of a UX, to be fair.
Yeah, I'm deep. I wonder stuff. So in the early 2010s, 2010s, a small startup called TinySpec, founded by many of the original Flickr team, were working on an online game called Glitch. They were spread out across many time zones, created an internal messaging app to help with collaboration because, hey, they could have been working on a game or, I guess, developing all their internal tools. Eventually, the game shut down. Today, that internal tool, the side project, it lives on as Slack. So that's the origin of Slack. It came from a group of Flickr people, which I don't even know if are they around anymore. I don't know if people even know what Flickr is. It's like Instagram, but slower.
Back in the days where you couldn't use vowels in your company name to get a good valuation.
We had the product group's old enough that we had a Flickr account where I'd post event pictures and everything there. It's like Instagram without engagement. You would just upload your pictures there and you'd share them. Yeah, so that's where that came from. The developers built all these internal tools instead of the game. I guess we now know what happened to the game. So I guess we know why that ended. But it turned into Slack. And so I thought that's a cool story. I don't know the origins of Discord, so now I'm gonna have to do some homework because I'm curious if it had similar origins. I know Discord for gamers and a lot of other stuff. We actually have a Discord for the product group, but no one everyone uses the Slack instead.
You have a Flickr?
We still have it. Do I use it? Can I even log into it? I don't know. I haven't uploaded it to it in a long time, so you can probably get a slice of history if it's still around. So that's how everything kind of that's the origin, you can say there. So I want to just kind of go around, see if anyone had any final comments before I say my final few bits here. And so go around. I'm going to go around the room, the on-camera roundtable we've got here for final comments as we wrap up. And also feel free. The floor is yours. And also make sure you also tell people how they can reach out to you, how they can find you online. I'm just going to go in the order on my screen. I'm going to start with you, John.
Oh, well, I just really want to say thank you to you, Jeremy, for the invitation, and Jay, Garrett, and Naranjan. This was a great conversation for me. I really enjoyed the dynamic, and it's great to learn from fellow product folks. It's also nice to hear reinforce some of these key themes, right? We didn't talk about a whole lot of tools or techniques. We talked about people and how to work with them better in order to get better products out. And that to me is what it's all about. So I just really appreciate the opportunity. It's great to be in conversation with y'all.
How can people get in touch with you online?
Oh yeah. If you, Jay Halberstadt, LinkedIn is the easiest way to connect. Would love to connect with anyone out there. I share things regularly. I geek out on product and Gen AI and other silliness. So would love to connect with anyone who'd like to continue the conversation. And
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Jay, you're up.
Definitely 100% echo John. Learned so much from this group and this conversation. Thanks, Jeremy, for having me today. And thank you for everyone who's tuning in. If anyone wants to continue the conversation, I'm on LinkedIn, just Jay Chen. Happy to connect.
Awesome. Garrett.
Yeah, also enjoyed. My favorite things to do are to learn and to teach, and I got to do both tonight, so I appreciate that. I also want to say, John, a quick comment. You were talking about capitalism as a dirty word. I'm trying to make it a good word again by calling it generous capitalism, where the company is more generous with the customers, the suppliers, and the employees. And I think that's the next stage of capitalism. If you go to YouTube and look at Freethinker Institute Generous Capitalism, you'll see what I mean. So
that comes after late stage.
Yeah, that I don't think we are in late stage. I think that's ridiculous that we're in late stage. We're in like the 4-year-old capitalism. We're in greedy capitalism. Yeah, we're not in late stage capitalism. I think Marx was very wrong. about many things. But
I'm
yeah,
sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there. If you had other stuff
go
you
ahead.
wanted to add.
No, and yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, excellent. Niranjan.
Oh, yeah, great conversation. It was fun to be on this talk the second time around. I remember the first one was more about AI. I loved how we got through the entire conversation.
Yeah, thanks for that. You got it. You hit it at the end. You had to say yeah.
Yes. But we got through the whole conversation. So that was really refreshing, right? And I think it just reinstated my core belief, which is like most defining products are forged under pressure and by good teams, right? Like great teams. It's always the people that matter the most than the process. And building a trustworthy and valuable platform is what serves our users the most. The best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. I'm always open to any strategic conversations or just have a coffee chat and see how I can help. It can be a daily product situation you're facing in the office, or you can be a startup founder trying to launch something new.
Jeremy, I forgot to say to reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. So I respond to everything on LinkedIn. So I forgot to say how to find me. Always like to talk with new people.
Awesome. And really, and I want to thank everyone who came, the people, those of you on camera as well as off camera. It's great engagement, great questions. It's really what makes TPG Live unique with the engagement from our chat room, or as I like to say, the off-camera part of our roundtable. And again, a special thanks to our roundtable, Niranjan Rode, John Halberstadt, Garrett Ling, Jay Chen. It was an awesome conversation talking about unlocking product influence, stakeholders, negotiation. We learned a lot about wargaming and pre-mortems, organizational change management, coming at it with data, introducing the elephant, active listening, having that backup plan, leading with empathy. Really great stuff to learn. So people definitely will be re-watching and re-listening to this many times. And if you'd like to join the roundtable, the on-camera part of our show, our on-camera roundtable, we'd love to have you join. All backgrounds, every type of person, background, level of experience, just reach out to me at jhorn@theproductguy.com. If there's other topics you'd like to see us cover in the future, there are a lot, especially beyond AI. Let me know in the comments below what you'd like to see us discuss in future episodes. And also, I have a favor to ask. A lot of people were engaged and a lot of people watch the show. Please like, subscribe, enable notifications. Tell some friends. You know some people out there in product or product adjacent or product interested that could learn from this. I think please pass on the word about the Product Way, the Product Way YouTube channel. It would really help us out, especially on that thing called an algorithm. And just again, thank you to both our on-camera, our off-camera roundtable for the wisdom, for the conversation, and I'll see you all next time on TPG Live.
Thanks for tuning in. Today's show is just the beginning. Inside the Product Way on Patreon, members go further with expanded TPG Live recaps that turn ideas into concrete actions, guided frameworks, practical insights for everyone from PM to CPO, and access to tools trusted by top product teams worldwide. New content drops every week, including case studies, practical product strategies, key insights, and deep dive articles. That includes our exclusive Roadmap to Mastery series featuring the Product Plus AI collection with real-world strategies to help you lead and deliver in the age of AI. Each week, members are opening doors to new roles and delivering bigger wins. Join them at patreon.com/theproductway or use the QR code on your screen to become a member right now. Enjoy, and thank you very much for your support.